Just in the last 2 weeks, we've seen ISIS take responsibility for the downing of a Russian civilian plane near Sharm el-Sheikh, then the twin bombings of Lebanon, then a day later these attacks in Paris. President Obama said before this Paris attack that ISIS was contained in Syria and Iraq. How did ISIS get here?
Well, I know this seems like something unpredictable, but what we're actually seeing is the progression of a terrorist organization. They almost all start out with a regional focus. Al-Qaeda had the Russians in Afghanistan, Al-Shabaab was focused on getting Ethiopians out of Somalia, and ISIS was focused on Syria and Iraq. But as they get more powerful, they look outward to take on other challenges. It's almost as if there are successive graduations. Elementary level terrorist organizations focus on small local problems. They graduate to more complicated regional issues, and then they begin to have broader aspirations. So it's almost a natural progression. That's why counterterrorism officials say they're always concerned about regional terrorist organizations because inevitably, as they develop, they turn their sights on the West.
That's NPR's Dina Temple-Raston with me in Paris. Dina, thanks.
You're welcome.
One of the Paris attackers may have entered Europe posing as a refugee from Syria. That's prompted many governors here in the U.S. to object to Syrian refugees settling in their states. The Obama administration says refugees are vetted extensively before they enter the U.S. Security experts warn of gaps in that process. NPR's Brian Naylor reports.
The administration says Syrians, like all refugees who hope to come to the U.S., are subject to the highest level of security checks of anyone entering the country. First, they're screened by the UN High Commission on Refugees. Those who are selected for possible entry to the U.S. are then subject to vetting by the National Counterterrorism Center, the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center, and the Departments of State, Defense, and Homeland Security. White House spokesman Josh Earnest says it's a rigorous process.
They go through databases that are maintained by DHS, the Department of Defense, and the intelligence community. There is biographical and biometric information that is collected about these individuals. They have to submit to in-person interviews to discuss their case.
Administration officials say refugees from Syria undergo additional screening that looks at where the refugee came from and what caused them to flee their home, stories that are checked out. All of this occurs before a refugee is allowed to set foot in the country. David Leopold is an immigration attorney who has represented refugees.
I can't imagine a more rigorous, detailed, extensive, careful process than the one that the United States government now applies to any refugee seeking to come to the United States for safe haven.
The U.S. has admitted some 1,800 Syrian refugees in the past 2 years. President Obama wants to allow 10,000 more. The administration says half of those who have been admitted are children. About a quarter of them are adults over 60. Officials say 2% are single males of combat age. The vetting process takes anywhere from 18 to 24 months. Once the refugees are in the country, they're resettled by one of 9 nonprofit groups, which include faith-based organizations. Most rely on volunteers to find refugees homes, furniture, school equipment, and jobs. Yet as thorough as the vetting process may sound, not everyone is convinced it's completely adequate. FBI Director James Comey, for one.
My concern there is that there are certain gaps that I don't want to talk about publicly in the data available to us.
One particular concern is while it's all well and good to check refugees against names on a terrorist watch list, U.S. intelligence in Syria has its own inadequacies that makes compiling a thorough list of possible terrorists difficult. Seth Jones is with the RAND Corporation.
U.S. intelligence collection in Syria is simply not as good. The U.S. doesn't have the capabilities, the footprint on the ground in Syria that it's had in other places.
So, says Jones,
vetting them isn't going to come up with a match because their names haven't gotten on a database.
Administration officials are briefing governors and members of Congress to reassure them about the vetting process. A senior administration official who asked not to be identified worries about losing the program's traditional bipartisan support, which the official called a rare thing in the current political climate. Brian Naylor, NPR News, Washington.
listening to All Things Considered from NPR News. President Obama is giving the Philippines 2 more second-hand naval vessels. He announced it yesterday in Manila. They're meant to bolster the country's ability to defend its territorial waters. Nobody mentioned China, but it's China's increasingly muscular efforts in the region that have people worried. And as Michael Sullivan reports, the Philippines has reason to be worried.
I'm sitting in the middle of Oyster Bay, off the coast of Palawan, in the South China Sea. The water is a deep blue. The jungle around me on either side is a deep green, and a light rain is beginning to fall. The Philippines Armed Forces plans to spend about $100 million to turn this picturesque bay into a major operations base. It will deploy its largest and best-equipped warships to protect its interests in the South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea, as they call it here. It's an ambitious plan, but they still need to find the money to build the facility and modernize the Philippine Navy. Those 2 best-equipped warships are gas-guzzling hand-me-down U.S. Coast Guard cutters. And the Philippine Air Force?
What I can say is that the height of Philippine air power was in the 50s, maybe 60s.
That's former Philippines National Security Advisor Royo Golez.
But because of no external security problem at that time, our air defense capability has diminished over the years.
And that is a charitable assessment for a less nuanced inventory. I reached out to Manuel Magato, a Reuters correspondent in Manila, who pretty much knows all there is to know about the Philippines military. Manuel Magato, how many jet fighters does the Philippine Air Force have?
None.
Manuel Magato, how many submarines does the Philippine Navy have?
None.
Manuel Magato, how many helicopter carriers does the Philippine Navy have?
None.
Manuel Magato, I'm seeing a pattern here.
Yes.
For decades, the Philippines enjoyed the protection of the U.S. military via its naval and air bases in the country, and the Philippines military focused its limited resources on the domestic threat posed by communist and Muslim separatists in the South. That left it ill-prepared to cope with China's new assertiveness in the South China Sea. That's why the country is now hoping its longtime ally, the U.S., will come to its aid in the Philippines' ongoing dispute with China over resources and territory.
To be honest, I think there's a level of over-expectation when it comes to the United States as far as the Philippines is concerned. I think there's a sense that the US pivot means that the United States will side automatically with countries like the Philippines against China.
And that would be a mistake, says Richard Heydarian of De La Salle University in Manila, whose new book is Asia's New Battlefield, the US, China, and the Struggle for the Western Pacific. He says the Obama administration's pivot towards Asia is being oversold here in the Philippines.
The Obama administration has been very clear. We take no position on sovereignty claims in the area. And at best, what the Philippines can expect from the United States is cooperation where the interests of 2 countries overlap, which is on the question of freedom of navigation.
And Heydarian says hope that the U.S. interest in freedom of navigation exercises, like the one it conducted last month, will send a message to China not to engage in any more territorial expansion in the South China Sea. Many here worry China's next target may be the resource-rich Reed Bank, not far from where China is completing an airfield on a reclaimed reef. Untapped and undefended, the Reed Bank has enough natural gas reserves, by some estimates, to keep China happy for decades. That's a powerful incentive for Beijing to keep nibbling, and for Manila to keep worrying. For NPR News, I'm Michael Sullivan in Manila.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
And you are listening to 90.1. Thanks for joining us. Hear what Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed has to say about the governor's plan to keep out Syrian refugees. That's at 5:04. Later next hour, WABE's LEU will have an in-depth look at the legalities of this debate. That's at 5:44. Stay tuned for that also on 90.1, Atlanta's NPR station.
Support for WABE comes from Arts at Tech, presenting Jake Shimabukuro on ukulele. Known for complex fingerwork, his music includes Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody and Schubert's Ave Maria. This Friday at the First Center. Tickets at arts.gatech.edu. And from Athena Health, web-based EHR, revenue cycle management, and population health services. Athena Health. Let doctors be doctors. You can learn more at athenahealth.com.
Tonight at 8 on PBA 30.
She ruled a vast empire and regarded her children as subjects. Queen Victoria raised 9 children in a stifling environment, and it drove some of them to destructive behavior and rebellion against the monarchy. Watch King Victoria's Children, tonight at 8 on PBA 30.
On the roads right now, on the perimeter's east side, heading southbound at Lawrenceville Highway, we have an accident there that's been moved to the shoulder, but for a while there it had 3 lanes blocked and traffic down to the single digits, just starting to pick up speed. Again, that's on the perimeter's east side, heading southbound at Lawrenceville Highway. On the perimeter's west side, heading southbound on the off-ramp to Cascade Road, we have a disabled vehicle over on the shoulder. We're likely to see some showers tonight, probably after midnight. They'll stick around on and off through tomorrow. Tonight's low will be 57. Tomorrow's high will be 69 degrees, 51 tomorrow night. We've got some sunshine coming our way Thursday and through the weekend. It's 4:50.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Audie Cornish.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. In a couple of weeks, the world will focus on Paris again, for entirely different reasons. President Obama and representatives from nearly 200 other countries will be there, trying to agree on a deal to limit carbon emissions and slow climate change. Todd Stern is the chief negotiator for the U.S. His title is Special Envoy for Climate Change, and he joins us now to preview the Paris talks. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Ari.
This summit begins November 30th. It's scheduled to last 2 weeks. What is at stake? Is this the last best chance for the world to act?
Well, I don't know if it's the last chance, but it's definitely the best chance. I think that the stars are more aligned to get an agreement than they've ever been, in my experience, and my experience goes back a fair amount. So I think that this is very important. I think the moment is now, and we have to try to seize it.
What do you expect the biggest sticking points to be?
Well, this notion of the basic divide between developed and developing countries and who's going to do what and how that differentiation is captured in the agreement is going to be an important one. We are for differentiation, but we have proposed, for example, a structure in which countries put in nationally determined commitments or contributions. So it is differentiated across the whole spectrum of countries rather than saying all developing countries only have to do this and developed countries do that.
When you talk about nationally determined goals, you mean each country says, okay, well, we are willing to shift this much to clean energy. Another country says, we're willing to preserve this much forest. Each country comes up with their own promise.
That's right.
When you look at all of the commitments that countries have made so far, more than 150 countries, including all the biggest global emitters, have already made their pledges before Paris begins. Are you satisfied with the total? Do you think it gets the world to where we need to be?
Well, it doesn't get the world to where we need to be, but it is a hugely important step. I would say that the notion that we have, I think, close to 160 countries who have come forward with their targets at this stage is an extraordinary thing. If anybody who is deep into the world of climate negotiations, if you would have said a few years ago, even a year ago, that we would have been looking at 160 targets from countries, 120 of them or more developing, people never would have believed it.
The goal of this climate summit is to produce a document that nearly 200 countries around the world can agree to, ideally a short document. There have been these huge debates over various drafts, and I've been looking at some of the debates over language here, and some of it comes down to, for example, whether countries shall do something or should do something. And it's incredible to me to think that, to some extent, the fate of the world hinges on the difference between shall and should.
Well, that's very understandable, and this isn't unique to climate change. That's the nature of international agreements. But yes, a few small words, sometimes a comma, can make a tremendous amount of difference.
And so is that what you're actually doing in these talks? Is like, oh no, we need to add a comma here, we need to take it out here, we need to change the shall to a should.
I am not only doing commas, but
you're also doing commas.
I am also doing commas and proud of it. I mean, sometimes it's important. So. No, you're absolutely right that sometimes you have negotiators who not only are going to miss the forest for the trees, they'll miss the forest for the bark on the trees. I mean, that does